Segment 4, the fall of Saigon and the rise of Tehran, the wages of appeasement. Now, I know you wrote this, Bruce, but listen to it again, because this is one of the more striking sentences in the book. By 1972, the Vietnam War was as good as won. I will repeat that. By 1972, the Vietnam War was as good as won. The guerrillas in the South had been neutralized, the countryside was stable, U.S. troops were going home, and the South Vietnamese were in a position to hold their own as long as they continued to have American air support and military resources, close quote. On August 30, 1975, Saigon falls to the North Vietnamese, producing the first unambiguous defeat in war that the United States of America had ever suffered. Between effective victory in 72 and total defeat in 75, what happened?
We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, as I believe the defense minister of South Vietnam said. The political will was lost. The anti-war movement, the factional political rivalries with Nixon and the Democrats, Democratic Congress, cut the aid off that would have allowed the South to compete. Remember,
the Democratic Congress voted to stop aid.
Yeah, and, and the South wasn't just fighting the North, it was fighting the material and the support coming from China and the Soviet Union.
Right.
And so there's no way they could stand on their own without American air support to obliterate the masses of northern troops invading.
Now, let's set this up. We've talked about the Greek city-states in the 4th century, and they had trouble uniting to ward off an invader. Then we've talked about Munich and appeasement of Hitler, and that was a question again of this could be terrible, we just can't fix.
Right.
But this is different. This is the United States having won, having done what was necessary for more than a decade, and then giving it all up.
But a lot of people didn't know they'd won. I mean, the popular perception of the war as it had been presented, the mismanagement.
Presented by?
Well, not just the media, but also the government. And the mismanagement of the political dimension of the war by the Johnson administration particularly, and not doing a better job of explaining to people how exactly this was becoming a success. You know, the perception of the war was up to 68, and the mistakes up to then became the whole war. But the successes after 68, Creighton Abrams, and the change, all that was
the change
lost.
From Westmoreland, who failed, to Abrams, who actually figured it out. Abrams was, in effect, the Petraeus figure. He actually went in and fixed it, and nobody in the United States cottoned on to it.
You know, we had the image created by the media, by the anti-war movement, by the leftists in the universities, etc., that this was a neo-imperialist, unjust, illegal war, that the idea of communist expansionism was a myth created by corporations in order to sell weapons, etc.
So what you've got here...
that narrative took hold, and I'm not even sure at that point that facts would have made any difference. You know, once the narrative takes hold in people's imaginations.
But so let me put this to you then. You're not saying that the American people gave up.
No, I think the polling shows that they didn't.
They didn't
very
give
late.
up,
No.
right? What you're saying is that some sort of elite, I don't want to say they were elitist. Lyndon Johnson was an ordinary man from a poor part of Texas all his life. In fact, he felt resentment toward the Eastern elites. But some small group in power, the people who were responsible for the narrative, the press, the government, got it wrong and confused the American people, misled the American people? Did they get it willfully? What happened? Why did they get it wrong?
Well, because there was a larger narrative that still works today that I think is pernicious, and it's the whole ultimately Marxist inspired idea of imperialism and colonialism as the world historical crimes, unique, horrible crimes, and that, that's what you fit the Cold War into from their perspective. I mean, from the perspective of many on the left, that this was a neo-imperialist attempt to reestablish the colonial power.
Fall of Saigon in 1975, Tehran, Iran, the Iranian Revolution, 1979. The Shah stands up to the turmoil in the streets. He seems to back down. He stands up. There's some vacillation back, but the critical moment takes place when the President of the United States, James Earl Carter, in effect says to the Shah, we're withdrawing our support. And the Shah leaves the country, and this popular uprising, unclear whether it was so popular in the first place, but what very quickly happens is that it goes from Bani Sadr, who seems some way or another to represent the popular forces, to Ayatollah Khomeini, who is not a popular figure at all, but a theocrat. And we, and far more to the point, the Iranian people, are still paying the price. So what happened with Jimmy Carter?
Again, it wasn't just Carter, it was many in the State Department and the foreign policy establishment. I think a lot of it was the failure to take religion seriously. The failure to see that what was going on in Iran was a religious revolution. And it's interesting to go back and see the way Khomeini is presented. You remember the Time magazine cover? It looks like Charles Manson.
I confess I don't, but all right.
Yeah, well, I mean, the notion is sort of like, well, there's this wacky guy there, this guy with this funny beard and this Manson-like stare, and he's got all these fanatics together. But the secularists, whether they're the communist or the secularist or the liberal Democrats, they're going to use him and his support, of which he had a lot, right? They'll provide maybe the shock troops, and then they'll settle down as good pragmatists and realize they have to integrate into the international order, and they have to have trade and sign agreements, and they'll be somebody we can work with. And there was plenty of evidence about the religious nature of the resistance to the Shah, right? It wasn't his corruption, or it wasn't the lethality of the Savak, which the mullahs in 1 year, surpassed their toll in their whole existence. It was his modernization efforts, which his father had started even earlier, that the clerical religious establishment and many religious people resisted and did not like because it was against Islam.
All right.